Best consulting engineers provided the engineering and the construction services for the study. Now this is a schematic of the pilot study. So the lower bottom circle next to the channel, of course, is our intake structure, and it was pumped up to some intake pumps, which is the box right above the intake structure. You see three rectangles that are kind of a burnt orange and an orange one next to that. What we did was we pumped seawater from the ship channel into these pretreatment units, and we were able to test 4 different pretreatment systems simultaneously, and sometimes one at a time, just to try to optimize them. We would run these 4 units, and those would flow into the filtrate tanks, which are the circles, gray circles on the left-hand side, a little toward the top. And the filtrate tank would go into the reverse osmosis building, which is the gray rectangular building. And that's, we would use that water from the pretreatment filtrate and supply it to the RO units. Now all that water was filtered and cleaned up, and then we had also some other side streams. We had the backwashes, we had drain lines, all those flows from the different processes. At the end of the study, or at the end of the day, they would go into this lagoon, which is the blue square on the right-hand side. All those streams would go back into a lagoon, mix in, and then they would be discharged back into the ship channel. So we ran this pilot study, as I said, for 18 months, and it was an interesting study. So a little bit about our raw water intake. As I mentioned, the study location was on the north side of the ship channel, and you'll see the intake structure right there. We found that the source water to be very challenging. For one thing, in South Texas and being on the coast, we have a lot of winds. We have winds usually 25 to 35 miles per hour. And so a lot of those waves were splashing up on the shore of the ship channel, and it was creating a lot of turbidity. And not only that, we had the cargo ships and the barges come through the ship channel. The port had a lot of traffic, and so whenever one of those ships would come by, we'd see a lot of turbidity. And so I have in the inset picture one of those turbidity spikes of when a cargo ship passed by. So this turned out to be very challenging, a very challenging source water. And we operate a brackish groundwater facility where the water is very constant. You don't see a lot of changes in the raw water source. Definitely this particular situation was a lot more challenging for those units. So a couple pictures of our pretreatment units. 3 of the pretreatment units were membrane type treatments. We had 2 ultrafiltration membrane systems. One was a NORIT system. We had another one that was a GE Xenon system. Again, both of them ultrafiltration. We also tested PAL. PAL is a microfiltration system. And then we tested this conventional type of treatment, which was a rapid mix, dual media filter type of system. And so what was interesting about these pretreatment units was we went through a rigorous test, a TCQ protocol, what we called it, which was a 3-stage testing phase where the first stage we optimized the pretreatment units. The second phase we ran this testing for 30 days straight, and then the third phase we actually did the clean in place, and we tested the unit at again. We ran it again to find out how well it recovered once we did the cleaning. And what we're trying to find out here by doing that is we want to find out what's the irreversible fouling that's occurring in these membrane systems. This is a picture of our RO units that were tested. On the left, we had a Torre seawater RO membrane system. On the right, same thing, but it was a film tech system. And those we ran, what we found was the membranes, the seawater membranes, were capable of producing a very high quality water that could produce the potable standards that we were trying to achieve. So some of the conclusions from the study, of course, we found that from the pilot study that it is technically feasible to use membrane processes to produce or to be used in a full-scale facility. At the end of the study, it was recommended by the engineering firm that we, instead of going into the 25 million gallon per day, the large-scale facility, that we actually go into a smaller scale facility. The 2.5 MGD would be a demonstration facility, and it would provide some research capabilities. And the reasoning behind that was they felt like a phased approach would mitigate some of that uncertainty that was still out there and mitigate some of that risk in investing in a large-scale facility. And then some of the data that was found from the demonstration facility would actually be used in expanding to a full-scale facility. These are some of the costs that were associated with the pilot, with the full-scale facility. The pilot study was a little bit over $3 million. Texas Water Development Board provided $1.34 million toward the pilot study. Brownsville funded the remainder of that study. The feasibility had estimated $151 million for a full scale. After the pilot study was done, that cost estimate was raised a little bit to 182. And the latest projection on a demonstration facility is that it would cost around $22.5 million. So some of the lessons learned, kind of maybe common sense to most, was we found that the intake structure, that placing it on the north side of the shore was definitely a mistake. And so locating that intake structure is critical to being able to minimize some of those turbidity spikes that cause so much havoc with those pretreatment systems. Those pretreatment systems in a seawater place or facility has to be robust enough because you're going to have those varying parameters coming into the plant, and they've just got to be able to defend against those parameters that are going into the RO system. And we like to say that pretreatment system, it's your last defense before fouling your ROs. So it's got to be robust. One thing I want to mention was, not that we were hoping for a red tide, but during the pilot study, we did not experience a red tide. And that was one of the things that we really wanted to test out was what would these membranes do under a red tide situation. So I guess we're fortunate we didn't have one. Some of the next steps that we have, of course, seawater desalination is just one tool in the toolbox of water management strategies. We've got to figure out how and when that next step is going to be taken for seawater desalination. We do believe that whether or not it's done in Brownsville, that the data that we collected and all the operating parameters and all the samples that were collected, all that data is very useful not only to Brownsville, but any city that is on the Gulf of Mexico, Texas or Mexico. We think it's very valuable. There's also going to be some, you saw the cost, and so that's a big hurdle that we're going to have to deal with. And then initiating the process, we've talked about stakeholders. One of the things that we participated in was we had a meeting with the stakeholders a couple of years ago. We had environmental groups, we had state agencies, focus groups, and what we were trying to do is we were trying to determine what were their issues, what were their concerns in constructing a full-scale facility, so that we weren't waiting until the full-scale facility was designed, but we could actually design some of those issues and concerns into the full-scale facility design. And I think that's it.
Thank you. Thank you. The next presentation's by Bill Hutchinson. Worked with Bill back 15, almost 20 years ago as he was doing some of the groundwater modeling for the K. Bailey Hutchinson plant. And Bill's now a consultant, and he's going to talk about the groundwater modeling of the Hueco Bolson, which is a transboundary aquifer between Texas, New Mexico, and Mexico. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to speak today. When Scott Reinert from El Paso Water called me and asked me to do this and said that the topic would be on the modeling of the Hueco Bolson, it was, a rather large subject. And then when the agenda came out, it was obvious it was going to be specific to the desalination. And we've heard some other discussions and topics on the Waco zone, and specifically in the border area in general. The modeling that I've done and was the basis for the work that on the desal. We also looked at conjunctive use, climate change, climate variability, and I know there was a question on ASR. We've applied the model that way too. So the talk today is really narrowly focused on what we did on the desal work, but recognize that there's a lot more work that's been done. But 10 minutes is 10 minutes. I'll provide a little background, then specifically talk about two models: the USGS model that was done in 2003, how we applied that model in the design of the desal plant. Then we also did an update of the model in 2016 and reran some of those analyses to kind of as a check to see how we're doing. We all know we're on the western side of Texas, the Waco zone. It extends into New Mexico, Texas, and into Mexico. And the area that we're talking about is this portion of the Waco zone. Now, the history of hydrogeology, if you will, in the Waco zone goes back to 1905. The USGS did some initial studies and published a report in 1905, and then that was followed up by some well drilling and some more looking at the data by a consultant for El Paso, what is now El Paso Water. These were the first documented scientific studies that looked at the relationship of the Rio Grande and the groundwater, which is the foundation of really everything. Now, this is back in a time when the rest of Texas thought groundwater was secret and occult. Out here, we were actually figuring stuff out. In 1976, the USGS generated the first groundwater model where we could actually do quantitative work with analyzing what happens when you pump a well. That work was extended in 1979, where there were lots of analyses done with that model. And then in 1991, shortly after Ed Archuleta got here, Boyle Engineering did a 50-year water plan for El Paso Water Utilities. It was the first 50-year plan done in the state of Texas. And then I think in 95, y'all got authority to be the regional planner in the group, or in the area. And a lot of this work was based on the 1976 and 1979 work. Now, more recently, the USGS did a model in 2003. This is the model that was completed in cooperation with Juarez, IBWC, Bureau of Reclamation, and El Paso Water. And then more recently, we've updated that model and added a transport component to it in 2016, working for El Paso Water. So the two big issues that we're dealing with in the Waco zone are declining groundwater levels and brackish water intrusion. Here's an example of a well in the airport area where the water levels had declined about 60 feet from 1960 to around the year 2000. And here's another well in the airport where the chloride concentration has gone steadily up since the mid-60s up through the early 2000s. And this is basically happening because as you pump water, water levels are drawn down, and brackish water, which is in the surrounding area, is drawn into those wells. So part of our work involved mapping water quality or chloride concentration at various depths. This is at one particular depth interval. And you can see we've got fresh water on the on the west side of the basin, and then it gets more brackish as you go to the east. So in a kind of a cartoonish sense, we can separate the basin into the fresh area and the brackish area, F or B. And basically, groundwater is flowing from the east to the west and from the northeast to the southwest. So here we have some wells in the airport that were drilled in the early 80s that not long after they were drilled went brackish. And so these became the kind of the targets for the supply for this plant. Well, we needed some additional wells. The plant was a joint effort between the utility and Fort Bliss, and its planned capacity was about 27.5 MGD. Well, the wells that I just showed would supply about half of it, so we needed some more wells. So we used the USGS model, the 2003 model, in cooperation with the Army Corps of Engineers, since it was a joint effort between the water utility and the base, to do an evaluation. And basically what we did is we looked at 8 alternative well field locations. And we concluded there was a hydraulic trough was going to be formed that was going to intercept the brackish water as it moved to the west. And that we concluded that if we located the wells along Loop 375, we'd minimize pipeline costs, we'd minimize impacts to the training area of Fort Bliss, and it provided the best opportunity to be flexible and adjust pumping rates in the future because we knew that the water quality was going to degrade over time. So these were the new wells that we located based on this effort, combined them with the white dots there, the wells at the airport, and those are our wells for that supply the plant. So basically what happens now is that instead of having the flow moving from the east to the west, now a trough has been created and we're intercepting that water in these wells, which provides the ability of the wells on the western side, those red dots, to maintain their fresh status. Now in 2016, all this work was done with a flow model. We didn't have a transport model at the time. The USGS was supposed to develop a transport model, but they could never quite get it to work. So the plant opened up in 2007, and we continued to collect data. The biggest thing in this whole deal was we had a lot of very good data. And we wanted to let the plant operate for a while before we tackled the next step, which was to update the model and then add a transport component. So we did that and finished that work in 2016. So now we can simulate changes in chloride concentration as well as water levels. And we completed several simulations specifically related to KBH operations. So in 2013, as you recall, there was a pretty bad drought here, and the desal plant was operated at the highest level it had been in its history, and it pumped about 21,000 acre-feet a year. So what we wanted to do was sort of simulate, well, what if we operated it at that level or a little bit higher? What would happen if we operated it constantly a little bit lower? What would the effects be? And a couple of examples here. The black line represents the historic, based on the calibrated model of the chloride level in one particular well on Fort Bliss. So you can see that over time it goes up from about 55 milligrams per liter in the late 70s all the way up to about 100. Well then, depending on which scenario we're looking at, the water level, the chloride concentration is either going to kind of hang around 95, or it's going to continue to drop as that trough develops and that fresh water from the west is brought in. And so under a high pumping circumstance, that water will actually clean up and over time actually get to about 80 milligrams per liter. But if you move over a little bit away, another Fort Bliss well, we can see that degradation of the water quality would continue under the no pumping alternative or the low pumping alternative, and would only sort of accelerate or improve the higher you pump. So all this information is helpful for the folks who are operating the plant, deciding how much money to spend each year on, because these wells and this plant are expensive to operate. So this is good information to have to understand what the benefits are to the aquifer, at least in a modeling sense, by operating it. And if you don't operate it, you're going to save money, but are you going to create a situation that later you're going to pay for in degraded water quality? So what we've understood from all this is that understanding that movement of the groundwater, which started with the work in 1905, is very necessary to locate wells strategically and understand and manage the operation of the basin. In all cases, data are superior to models. Data are what you just make operational decisions on. Models help some long-range planning. Understand what sort of things are going to happen over a 20, 30, 40-year period. You do not make operational decisions based on models. And so with that, I'll guess turn it back over and we can have some more discussion later.
Thanks, guys. The next speaker is Germán Jesus Lozola Marquez from the Baja California Water Commission, and he's going to talk about the desal plant, seawater desal plant in Rosarito.
Muy buenas tardes, damas y caballeros. Gracias por la invitación. Se escucha bien, ¿verdad? Aquí no se oye igual. Se escucha eco. Bueno, voy a permitir hacerles una presentación sobre el proceso que traemos de proyectos de desalación en Baja California. En Baja California traemos 3 proyectos de desaladoras. La primera de ellas, que la terminamos ya el siguiente, en 2 meses empieza a operar en la ciudad de Ensenada, Baja California, con una capacidad de 250 litros por segundo. Y la dejamos, la tubería de toma y descarga preparada para otros 250, para en un corto tiempo poner un módulo más y duplicarla a 500 litros por segundo. Otra desaladora que traemos en proyecto es al sur de la frontera de San Diego de Tijuana, a 250 kilómetros, las mismas características que tenemos en la ciudad de Ensenada, Baja California. Y esta, que voy a hacer la presentación, desaladora de Rosarito, es un proyecto, un macroproyecto de una desaladora con una visión, ¿sí?, a un corto tiempo y a un largo plazo. ¿En qué sentido? Sabemos y he escuchado por aquí a todos de que no tenemos agua, no llueve, lo que tenemos del río Colorado, pues ahora sí lo comparten 7 estados de la Unión Americana, Sonora y Baja California. Entonces, voy a empezar. La desalinización en Baja California. Como antecedentes, la desalinización del agua es un proceso físico-químico utilizado para eliminar las sales disueltas, los minerales del agua, y sea apta para el consumo humano. Ya en países como en Estados Unidos, Arabia Saudita, Emiratos Árabes, Chipre e Israel, es ya un proceso común. Se estima que en la actualidad funcionan más de 15,000 plantas de desalinación en el mundo. La fotografía que ven ahí es una planta de la empresa y dueña Veolia. ¿Qué antecedentes? Bueno, con el interés de este tema de la desalinización de agua de mar en Baja California, es debido a la sequía que representa esta zona y a las escasas fuentes de abastecimiento en la región. Tenemos pozos, ¿sí?, que están explotados, y algunos otros más con una introducción salina, como aquí lo menciona en los diferentes personas que me han antecedido. Las aguas tienen una asignación y están concesionadas. Como pueden ver en la gráfica, la precipitación que tenemos en algunos estados, y si vemos la última es Baja California, tenemos 0.17 milímetros anuales de lluvia. Baja California tiene un ancho de 150 kilómetros, la poca lluvia que llega a caer corre mitad Pacífico, mitad al Mar de Cortés, y no hay tiempo de recargas. Estas situaciones han generado una fuerte dependencia del río Colorado, además de altos costos por la transportación de este vital líquido a los diferentes municipios. Es por eso que la desalinización está considerada como la mejor alternativa para cubrir demanda de agua en nuestro estado, y los precios ya son competitivos y es una fuente inagotable de recursos. Ya se mencionaba también hace rato de los costos que se tienen en cuanto a la desalación, cómo ha variado con el tiempo. La tecnología ha permitido más acceso a la misma. Y aquí está lo que les comentaba hace rato, la cuenca del río Colorado, que abastece 7 estados de la Unión Americana. Como pueden ver en la gráfica, hace un recorrido desde Wyoming, y somos, en Baja California, son los últimos. Somos los que recibimos. Ya mencionaron también por parte de la ONG la manera como la cuenca del Delta ha mermado, y el flujo pulso que se impulsó hace 3 años fue algo muy atinado. El agua a la que tenemos derecho de los 1.850 millones anuales asignados a México, corresponden al uso urbano, en la tabla lo vemos. Mexicali, sus derechos de agua ascienden a 82 millones, Tecate asciende a 3.3, Tijuana, Ensenada 9 millones y hacen un total de 197 millones. Pero la demanda actual que tenemos en cada uno de ellos la vemos en la siguiente barra. Mexicali de 82 requiere 111 millones, Tecate de 3.3 solicita y consume 10 millones de metros cúbicos, Tijuana Rosarito de 80 que tiene derecho consume 126 y va creciendo año con año esta demanda. Igualmente en Ensenada vemos lo mismo y en la gráfica a un lado vemos cómo está repartida el agua en el estado, donde la agrícola se lleva gran porcentaje de este líquido, el 10% en la industria, el 7.91 el 10 a las ciudades, el 7.9 a la industria y en otros el 0.24%. Es el uso agrícola y el uso público. Aquí tenemos en esta imagen, sí, el acueducto que entró en operaciones en 1985. Antes de esta fecha existió un acueducto en Baja California ubicado en playas de Tijuana que operaba desde los 70s, pero con un costo muy alto. Al entrar en operaciones este acueducto se dejó el anterior con tecnología, ya imaginarán, algo anticuadita, ¿no? Bueno, el recorrido lo vemos, ingresa en la presa Morelos, hace un recorrido, sí, para poder llegar, recorre más de 100 kilómetros para llegar a una de las plantas de bombeo que tenemos. Si ustedes ven en la gráfica tenemos PB0 y habla de un canal alimentador, ese recorrido, y tenemos que librar una altura de 1,061 metros, que subimos la sierra y ya lo demás va por gravedad. Esta agua que bombeamos año con año son 148 millones de metros cúbicos por un acueducto con una capacidad de 5.3 metros cúbicos, con un gasto de energía de 700 millones anuales. La propuesta. Entró en Baja California una ley de asociación pública-privada en el estado, en donde se da oportunidad a las empresas de presentar proyectos y de esta manera fue como llegó y se presentó esta desaladora. La planta es una desalinizadora de agua de mar con un sistema de ósmosis inversa y una capacidad en una primera etapa de 2.2 metros cúbicos por segundo y en una segunda etapa sería 2.2 más para tener una totalidad de 4.4 metros cúbicos por segundo. Es la toma de agua de mar en un canal que se tiene en una estación de Comisión Federal de Electricidad, la descarga de agua de mar o la descarga de rechazo o salmuera como se maneja, ahí mismo en otro de los canales que vierte la misma empresa productora de energía eléctrica. Serían 2 tanques de depósito de agua producto con una capacidad de 20,000 metros cúbicos y la modalidad, como les decía, es asociación pública-privada con una concesión a 37 años. Esta